So I have a PowerPoint presentation. I hope I'm not too long. I speak fast. The cartoonist from The Economist, more than a year ago, he actually summarized what I intend to say. The politicization of European integration is driven by the European nationalists, and they are undermining the process of European integration. Now, there are two types of conflicts politicizing European integration. One is an intergovernmental conflict, debtors versus creditor states, the Visegrad states versus Germany, Italy, and others. The other one is the interpartisan conflict at the national level, the European promoters versus the Eurosceptics, and I'm talking briefly only about the second conflict, about the Eurosceptics versus the Europeanists. Now, at the national level, the mainstream parties tend to depoliticize European integration. They are constrained by the left-right structure of party competition because European integration cuts across the traditional left-right opposition. They are constrained by distinct programmatic reputations, by internal divisions, and by incumbency, some of them. So where does the source of dynamism of politicization come from? It comes from new parties, new challenges, from the Eurosceptics, from the left and the right end of the political spectrum. So Dehousse and Marx, two colleagues in comparative politics, they talk about the inverted U-curve. You have at both ends the Eurosceptics, which oppose European integration, and then in the center you have the mainstream parties which are in favor of European integration. There are some mainstream parties which have also been involved, although they have tried to depoliticize in the politicization of Europe. Think of the Tories in Britain and think of the CDU, CSU, when it was about Turkey's accession. Now, what happened in the Great Recession? In the Great Recession, the intergovernmental conflict in the Eurozone crisis between debtors and creditors spilled over to the domestic level and increased politicization about European integration at the domestic level. It did so in different ways in the different regions of Europe. And it is very important to distinguish North, South, and East. In Northwest of Europe, the resistance against the EU is mobilized in identitarian terms. And we have talked about Stein Rokkan, about the integration, demarcation, cleavage, which is a new kind of political conflict about different issues, and European integration is part of it. So it's about European integration, it's about immigration, it's about Islam, and it's about cultural liberalism, homosexual rights and things like that. This resistance against Europe in identitarian terms is driven by the populist radical right, the new right, which has mobilized in this way since the early 80s. Le Pen, Front National in France, for the first time had an electoral success in the early 80s. And in the countries where the populist radical right was already established, it was reinforced by the Great Recession. In the countries where it did not exist yet, it rose as a result of EU crisis management in the Great Recession. The examples are the rise of UKIP, the True Finns, and of course, yesterday, day before yesterday, you saw it, the AfD in Germany. The AfD was first mobilizing against the European integration. Lücke, the German professors, they were against the Eurozone. Only later on, they mobilized on immigration. In Southern Europe, the resistance against the EU was in economic terms, and it was not driven by the radical right, it was driven by the radical left, the new left. Syriza is the typical example, and especially in Greece, this resistance was mobilized as a result of the 3 bailouts. In Central and Eastern Europe, the impact of the crisis was ambivalent because On the one hand, you had the Baltic states, you had Slovakia, you had Slovenia joining the Eurozone in the midst of the crisis. And on the other hand, you had the rise of a defensive nationalism fueled especially by the refugees crisis. Fidesz in Poland, PiS in Hungary, PiS in Poland, and the post-communist PSD as another example in Romania. These were mainstream parties, not the radical left, not the radical right, mainstream parties which mobilize against the European Union. Now we have tried to study this more systematically, what I just sketched in a few words. And we have studied electoral campaigns in 15 countries, 7 Northwestern European, 4 Southern and 4 Central and Eastern European countries, 57 elections in total, 1 before the crisis in each country, and all the elections since the crisis up to February 2016. What we have studied is the campaign, the electoral campaign in the press. And we had different issue categories, but 2 were the Euro and European integration. And what I'm trying to show you now are 2 types of results. One is the overall politicization across Europe of European integration in the crisis and also in the 3 regions. And the other one will be the contribution of individual party families. Now, politicization, if I say politicization, the way we operationalize this is the multiplication of salience, how visible, how transparent is the issue in the public sphere, and polarization, that is, how polarized are the different parties on the issue. The more visible an issue is, and the more polarized the parties are on the issue, the more politicized will it be. And here you see the result across Europe. You have the line for European integration, you have the line for economic issues in general, the line for political issues, issues like corruption in general, and immigration and nationalism as the 4th line. What you see is a striking increase of the politicization of European integration in general across Europe, starting in the year 2010. That's the year when the Euro crisis started. That's why I do PowerPoint, to show you this graph. Now, look at this graph. If you do this by region, there is one region, look at the graph on the left, which has highly politicized European integration, and the other 2 regions hardly at all. It's the south. In the south of Europe, European integration has very strongly politicized. And then look at the graph on the right. Look at the 4 countries we had in southern Europe. It's above all Greece. So this strong politicization of Greece, they had 5 elections in that period, is above all a Greek effect, also Portuguese to some extent. They were highly politicizing Europe at the time of the bailout in 2011, and to some extent also an Italian effect, but it's above all Greece. Now the second result I would like to show you is the contribution of the individual parties, and I schematically distinguish radical left, center right, radical right, pre-crisis, post-crisis, the party positions weighted by salience on European integration and the Euro. And here you see it by region. Left on top, you see the northwest of Europe, and you see the inverted U-curve. You see on the radical left and the radical right, the Euroscepticism is very strong, and it decreased in the crisis. So the crisis accentuated also in the northwest of Europe the new left and new right opposition to Europe. In the east you see not very much going on. It's rather flat. Until the end of 2015, opposition to Europe was not very vocal. On the left down, on the left lower graph is the south without Greece, and you see the Euroscepticism is even less pronounced than in the northwest of Europe. The real difference is Greece. Here you see the inverted U-curve accentuated. Not only are the polar parties much more Eurosceptic, also the center parties are much more Europeanist. So if you politicize Europe, as you have done it in the case of Greece, you get a much more accentuated distinction between opponents to European integration and proponents of European integration. That's what I wanted to tell you.